Hello everyone, this is the English version of my channel, translated by a neural network. I can't vouch for the quality of English because I don't know it. Enjoy your viewing! One, two, three. Greetings to my multi-million army of hand paint artists. In this video, I will tell you what you need to know to create a hand paint texture. In the first block, we'll discuss the issue of knowing programs. And in the second block, we'll discuss the issue of knowing how to draw. You just stumble upon pictures like this. For artists with experience in hand paint texture, what does this mean? Somewhere at the bottom of the page, here is an explanation on this topic. Some list of mandatory and recommended skills. And sometimes you want specifics. What do you mean by all these jokes? And now for all those who don't get what's written there, I'll tell you specifically what it's all about. So we have a minimum knowledge for creating hand paint textures and advanced knowledge for creating super hand painted textures. Let me tell you about the minimum set. Well, the minimum knowledge begins with understanding what hand paint is. I've made this video specifically for that. Those who haven't seen it, check it out. And those who have, well done. Next step. To be able to create hand paint textures, we need to master any 3D editor. Because we create textures for 3D models, if we just draw, it will be regular drawing. But where do we get 3D models from if we can't create them ourselves? It won't be so that we will have our own 3D artist who will simply supply us with tons of models. That's exactly why we need to master some 3D editor. By the way, pay attention to these pictures here. Here flows with YouTube a comment. YouTube. Here it can be not only Blender, but anything you want. As here, no Photoshop with some AI. And in terms of the volume of knowledge for 3D, we just need to be able to create geometry, even from such a picture. As here I made a sword. This is my sword. Here is to make geometry from the picture and unfold it somehow. And this will be the minimum knowledge for 3D programs. Already at the next step, we will need to master any 2D editor. Besides the fact that we can draw any concept sketch we need in it, we can also edit our texture, which we will draw in 3D CAD or in any other program. I would like to note here that you need to learn how to work with layers, dab brushes and color correction, curve levels and everything else, to tighten up the texture and so on. Well, and basic tools like a lasso, selection, movement, all these basic things, so we can edit. Imagine this is a picture, drag and drop the islands, some elements, duplicate and so on. Drag just like this in 3D CAD. I don't know how to edit the glass like this. If we want to duplicate some kind of picture from here, like a screw, right? This, of course, there is a stamp in the 3D catalog. And if we have something much bigger than a screw, that's why we need a camera, Shoop or another editor. In short, without a 2D editor, fine-tuning the texture simply becomes impossible. And as the next step, we will need to study programs for creating textures on models, for drawing on them, mainly 3D Cooler. Maybe there's some other software somewhere, but try to find a guide for it. That's the whole point. I recorded a full 20 minutes for you. Plus, there's an extra approximately 6 minutes second part. Everything you need to start with 3D code. Just calmly watch this video and get to grips with this useful program. To conclude, I also created this cool video on how you can do without a 3D CAD, and you can check that out too. Just useful information. And if you get the hang of 1, 2, 3 programs, even without drawing skills, you will be able to create something like this log, a branch. Despite its quality, the task itself is completed. If you have the experience and knowledge to create hand paint textures on your own models, it just takes time for your branch to become something more attractive. And additional knowledge. I'll tell you about them in the second block. And now let's blend the advanced volume of buildings. The first step for us is to study sculpting programs. Primarily, this is a brush for us. Here we create a high poly model. A model with incredibly high detail. We need such a model to work with in the future. In the third program, we bake these textured boxes. But let's go back to the first step. When we studied this program. Everything is cool. Great model. Where are all the nuances, these creases, folds, damages, some other texture, and everything else? Speeches and so on. They are all resolved here, not as a result. Drawings not in the texture. And when all our geometry is finished, highly detailed, high polygonal, we will create retopology for it and also create a UV unwrapping. That is in the advanced stage. A 3D editor for creating low poly geometry is like, in the first case where we have a minimal volume of buildings, we just skip the sculpting stage and we immediately do grid topology, if you can call it that, low poly. And after we've made a model about the field, we take this high polygon geometry, take low polygon geometry and throw them into a third program called Marmoset. In general, you can bake ambient occlusion and normal map in a variety of editors, but I learned in Marmoset. At this stage, we bake the information from the high polygon model into the low poly. Thus, all information about these folds, muscles, and everything else. We are moving to a low poly model, that is, we have absolutely small geometry, but at the same time we have absolutely great detail. This method is now becoming obsolete, like why even optimize games if you have RTX 4090 graphics cards, processor intro and night intro, and the operational memory is 64 gigabytes. Well, and so on in short, when they were just buckets before. This model creation process was necessary. Now no one cares at all, we have nanites, lumens, Unreal Engine 5. And now let's get back to the video. In general, when we baked everything, we are moving on to the 3D course. We start coloring the model in the code. Where we have an ambient occlusion normal map, we don't need at all because it's necessary. For PBR models, because they have a light source and they need a proper light response, all these surfaces. Of course, there are sinful hand paint projects where they bake the norm for some reason. Although all decisions about light and shadows are made by the artist in the texture. Well, okay. And in the very end we move to our 2D editor, where we simply polish the texture. Everything that we did not manage to do in the 3D room. We're doing it in Photoshop. And with this our work with the model ends. In the end, of course, the beginner ends up with something like this. And such work, by the way, from this branch will differ in that we've sculpted everything here. We will have some large textured cracks and so on. Well, in general, all the sculpture work that we baked in here. Then I hope the dudes won't get offended that I'm showing their works with a sad smiley. I hope they'll understand. And this is what these 2 volumes of knowledge look like in general. A small one for the start and an advanced one. For those who want to specifically delve into the process of creating models. That's the end of block 1, about the knowledge necessary for creating hand-paint textures. Now let's move to the second block, where I'll talk about what we need to know about drawing so that our textures on models look better. Let's start with this. Here is a complete pipeline or process for working on a 2D drawing where we have geometry at the core. That is basic shapes. Then comes the illumination of this geometry, detailing, and finally working with color. And the better you master all these 3 skills, understanding the shape of objects, understanding how lighting works and how to draw it on objects, and the better you can work with color, the better your hand paint texture will be. Well, what I want to say is that you should not forget about working with composition and artistic construction, that is, design. You might learn how to illuminate, color, and understand shapes, but for your objects to become more interesting, you need to know this whole checklist. But I'll talk about her later. Let's get back to this. What's the bare minimum of knowledge we need to be able to draw? Well, first of all, understanding all the basic shapes and that all our objects consist of them, like this teapot. It may seem complex, but if you divide it like this, it turns out it's just cylinders and cones. And so completely in the world, even this head here is represented as a cylinder, a ball, and some triangular pyramid. And just why understanding the form of objects is the basis of everything. There was a wonderful example that a blind person sees neither color nor light. but he can always feel the shape and understand its form. So understanding the form of objects is the basis of everything. Plus, besides, the second step, where we create object lighting, cannot be done without the first, as the shape determines what the lighting on the object will look like. And here, by the way, at the top, these little rectangles, they vividly show how complexity grows. If at first it is just some color where we draw lines. Then we have a gradient from dark to white. Thus, with this gradient, we set the lighting to the object. For instance, if we have a cube, it will be divided into 3 parts, where we have absolute brightness, darkness, and something in between. Or if you put it in ordinary terms, the side that faces the light, the side of its own shadow, and something in between, semi-shadow or whatever it's called, something like that. The peculiarity of the cubic shape is that it has rigid edges that separate the light in this way. The cylinder, well, basically this wave, it's 2 cylinders like this lying together, and the sphere is simply round. They don't have such rigid borders, but the cylinder does have a rigid border. It's right here on the side. But where there are no rigid borders, this smoothness, a smooth transition from light to dark forms here for us. Whether it's dark or the opposite is the same with the sphere. And here, the minimum volume of knowledge about lighting is to understand what the lighting looks like on basic figures. This will be enough to draw hand point textures. The most basic ones. This is just a clear typical mistake of a dude who made this 3D model. And if it's converted to black and white, the lighting will be absolutely the same. The top, which is turned toward the light source, is the same light, like the sideways, which is generally turned away from it. If a person knew how to draw lighting, then they would have done something like this. They would have distinguished different planes, and then we would have understood where the source of lighting is, and how the object is illuminated. And now let's go back to that example where we have a blind person. But now we will have not a blind person, but a person who has difficulty distinguishing colors. But this person can perfectly recognize a black and white picture. So lighting comes after understanding the shapes of objects. And the final third step, the most difficult in drawing, is working with color and painting. In addition to just having a black and white slider, now we've added... There are 2 sliders. One controls saturation, that is, the purity of the color, and the other slider is for selecting its spectrum color. And now the fun begins, where we have to properly balance between these 3 sliders. So, what's the minimum color knowledge we need here? Well, first of all, avoid oversaturation, like you see here, super bright blue hair. Avoid monochrome when we work in shades of gray. They are just such black trunks. Color saturation, by the way, can control itself not only through gray, but also its own color. Here are 2 examples where we have a lit side, it looks like this. And the shadow side, it looks like this. Essentially, this is monochrome, but only in its own color. A wonderful example to the left where we have lighting, and it's this kind of blue. Anything, and there's its own shadow, it's the purple color fades. This is not a monochrome picture, but this is an example of monochromy. Work in the middle. It's called the safe zone, and then your color will be just fine. And also don't forget to avoid dirty colors. As they look, yes, you simply work in gray. That is, in this zone. Instead of increasing saturation in the shade or light, you can either increase saturation or depict brightness with gray. That's how dot is formed. But dot is always formed in shadows, because someone is painting with gray, not saturated. And this includes the fact that highlights and shadows are not drawn in white and black. Better to use saturated colors, but be careful. So again, returning to monochromicity. Here are the colors used in light and shadow, so that our picture doesn't look monochrome. Just different shades of colors. And with that, we can say everything. Such is the minimum body of knowledge we need for each phase of drawing. Most of them are in color because color has the most issues. I've told and demonstrated everything about them. Well, everything you need to start. Of course, I haven't mentioned color schemes, triads, dyads, and everything else, but let's at least sort this out. That would be great. And now we can finally move on to this picture. A collection of good works that we will be able to construct the form like this, illuminate it and color it. Well, without this cheat sheet, I don't remember where and when I got it, but without this cheat sheet our works will look worse. Oh, what's in this memo? Nothing special. Everyone knows the information about large, medium, and small forms. About proportions and their relationship, about rhythm, rhymes, segments, function, readability, common sense, balance, focus, and all the rest. That's all the basic info about composition. If you incorporate all these things into your work, besides being well drawn, lit, and painted, our work will be so it will look even more interesting because we adhere to these rules. They weren't fools who invented them. Now, I think we can finish. The most important question is coming up. Beginners will clutch their heads and think, I will never master this. How to deal with all this information? Let me reassure you. Well, first of all, I myself once couldn't do anything and all my painting ended and began in Microsoft Paint. Well, over time everything worked out, but the Artesian grew to such a number. Work. So just give yourself time. Work at your own pace. Allocate time for each stage, time for each program. Let it be a year, in total. If needed, 2. And that's it. Work quietly and you will master each step. I mastered all this, to some extent. And the second consolation for those who are afraid of everything new and programs, they are scared to crap. You have to understand everything is new. It offers new opportunities, new comfort, work speed improves, quality and so forth. People are just used to it. It's convenient for them. Remember these words. And they don't want to move any further. Only old people are hostages to old comforts and habits. And they refuse something better and more comfortable. And of cool technological modern. Simply because they are unsure of their abilities. They find it complicated and think they won't cope. They'll cope. All of them will. No matter how many lessons you watch. I want to master I want to master this, and I am 50 years old. And they always say, age is no obstacle. There are difficulties, of course, but age never stands in the way. So just soak this elephant piece by piece. Cut and eat it. And everything will work out. The main thing is that the knife is sharper and longer. This video ends here. I hope this information was useful to you. So let's go study everything. If someone doesn't know, who knew, keep developing and create new works